One of the most common questions that I get from filmmakers and new colorists is, how do you grade this particular camera or that particular camera? And I want to talk about that today. Specifically, we're going to be talking about how I grade red footage. But if you want to know the honest truth, the answer to that question whenever it comes up, regardless of the camera that I'm being asked about, how do you grade this particular camera? My approach doesn't really change based on the camera that I'm grading. That's not to say that all cameras are the same. Of course, some images, or rather some cameras, can capture more dynamic range or more color volume or more noise or less noise than others. But by the time I am actually hands-on grading, my goal really for my setup process is to be in a position where I can grade in what I would call an image-centric mode, where I can simply be looking at the image, responding to what I see in it, identifying opportunities, looking for things that I want to manage, and grading the strongest possible form of that image based on what I see, and of course, based on the direction that I'm getting from my client. So while this video on the surface is about how I grade red footage, in a sense, it's really about how I grade, period, because we want to be working in more of an image-centric and less of a camera-centric way. And I'm going to show you how that plays out specifically with red footage. Before we dive in, if you are not subscribed to the channel yet, we do a lot of color grading content here on the channel. So if you are into color grading, make sure you subscribe and that you're in the loop for all the cool stuff that we're doing here on the channel. We do 2 new videos a week. We do a live Q&A session every Friday. Lots of fun stuff happening. So make sure you subscribe, make sure you turn on your notifications. Let's take a look at some red footage here inside of Resolve. So what are we looking at right now? I have a timeline of various red footage that I've pulled in, and you might notice right off the bat that this red footage actually looks pretty normalized. We're not really looking at a log state image, and that is because I've already gone ahead and done the first 2 things that I always do at the beginning of any color grade. Those things are, first of all, to color manage my material. That's simply a way of taking what the camera saw and transforming it into what my display can show on an automatic basis using good color science. That's the foundation that I always am grading within or grading on top of. It's the first thing that I do when I get into a new project. The next thing that I've also done is I've set up a template node graph here that is going to give me a structure to fill out as I'm working my way and grading through individual shots. There's nothing happening in any of these nodes right now, but I do have a template in there that I can begin to fill out. So with those things in place, we're ready to begin going through and talking about how I grade individual shots. Now, today we're not necessarily looking at an assembled edit of a particular scene from a film or a commercial or a set of continuous material that was all meant to be married together. But something else that I would typically use at this point in my process is some kind of unifying look to put everything together, to make everything feel consistent. So I am going to go ahead and do that before we proceed. Let's go over to the timeline level of my node graph. And I'm going to go over into my LUTs folder, and I'm going to look in the CKC folder. And I'm going to go into Voyager. This is a set of creative LUTs that I released earlier this year. And I'm going to look in the Essentials pack within Voyager and just flip through these high quality looks that I've made that are designed to work right within DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate, which is my working color space. And by the way, as I'm looking through here, if you're not familiar with all that color management stuff that I was talking about just a minute ago, don't worry, we got you covered. Lots of good content here on the channel where you can brush up on those things. And in particular, my DaVinci Wide Gamut Workflow series will show you the exact settings that I'm using here today. For now, I'm just going to keep flipping through. And so far, I really like what I'm seeing with Crucis as well as with Halka here. I'm just going to flip through. These are a wide variety of really nice looking, clean looks that are going to do nice things for the image. And after looking through all those, I really like Halka. It's just a nice, subtle enhancement to the image. And I'm just going to go ahead and label this node so that I know what I'm looking at if I come back to it later. All right, let's get into some color grading. So you can see here, I've got this template node graph. This template node graph is not based on the camera that I'm grading. And because I'm color managed, I'm now working in the same color space regardless of what the original color space of this camera was. That color space is DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate. So I'm working in the same node graph, and even the response of things like my offset when I go to adjust my exposure, or my contrast pivot knobs when I go to that ratio node and start adjusting those things, even down to the response of those knobs, I'm going to be in familiar territory because I'm grading in the same mode, using the same tools, in the same color space that I always grade in. So I really want to emphasize today that ultimately when we're talking about how to grade this camera or that camera, that there is more that is the same between grading camera A and B than that differs. All right, Let's go forward. This shot is coming in a balanced position, as you would expect, since it's a piece of test material. I'm going to close my LUTs here and maybe close down these clips so the image is a little bigger. And let's just go forward and get a feel for how we can grade red material. I'm just going to trim this exposure down. Contrast ratio feels pretty decent, but maybe we'll add just a little bit of extra snap to the image, like so. And this one is living in a nice kind of cooler color register, but I do want to move just a little bit away from what I'm perceiving as a bit of a slightly magenta-ish cast. So I'm just going to move away from that ever so slightly, like so. And maybe go a little bit warmer as well, so I'm still getting some nice skin tone. So that's a small tweak, but it's one that I really like. You can maybe even see it more easily on my vector scope than you can in the image itself, since we're just looking at this little window here. And one thing that I will call out that I often see with red footage specifically is red footage has the capacity to get very colorful. And we're actually going to see that in just a minute. When you have like a very colorful source in the frame or, object in the frame, it has the ability to get very colorful. But what you'll notice is low medium saturations, things like skin, can come in a little bit less saturated than we might want. So a trick that I will often do is I will go over to my custom curves, or rather my sat versus sat curves, and I'm just going to look at boosting my saturations in the very bottom of my image. So I'm going to add a control point and then make just a little rainbow down here. And really what I'm looking at is skin. I'm trying to wake up skin tone a little bit without moving my high saturations whatsoever. So if I do off and then on, let's go full screen even, off and then on. Maybe that's a little bit further than I would go, but I want to give you an example you can really see. This is a good example of the kind of saturation that I will often try to sneak into red footage when I feel like I'm down in that lower saturation area where the colors are really starting to feel a little bit lifeless. It's especially important for skin tone. So again, I wouldn't necessarily reach for a normal saturation knob because that's going to saturate the colors I don't want to touch, the colors that are already very saturated. This sat versus sat trick, just in the very, very bottom of the saturation curve, can be a nice way to wake up the image and skin tones in particular. Let's see what else we got here in terms of clips. Here's a shot that is taken from the same shoot that this prior frame was, and you can see exactly what I was saying a moment ago, like the traffic light up here, that's plenty saturated, right? So if I had reached for my saturation knob, I would be probably beginning to clip out that traffic light, certainly get a garish reproduction that I'm not interested in. But if I do this little sat versus sat trick, let's literally go back to shot number 2, tap node 4, hit Command C, go to shot number 3, and go to node number 4 within this node graph and tap Command V. You can see it's not moving that traffic light at all, but if I zoom in on this woman's face, we're adding quite a bit of pop, quite a bit of color to her. So that's something that I often see with red footage that I will address in the following way. A couple other things that often come up when I'm dealing with red footage. Let's go to shot number 4 here. Now, so far we've been grading R3D material, which when we're color managing automatically debayers in the proper way and color manages perfectly well. This happens to be a shot that was shot in log if I bypass all my color management. However, it's already been encoded into a ProRes, so I don't actually know what color space to use here. I'm going to show you how I kind of go through figuring these things out. So I know this is red and I know it's in log, right? So my first guess would typically be to right click, go to input color space and select red wide gamut RGB log 3G10. And because I don't actually know, in this case, I don't have the opportunity to ask the filmmaker or the camera person, I'm just having to come up with a best fit, with a best guess. So if I unbypass my color management, here's what I'm getting when I tag my input color space as red wide gamut RGB log 3G10. That's going to be my first guess for red footage that is in log. In this case, my first guess is not correct. It doesn't work. So I want to try another guess. I want to see if I can get something that looks closer. And when I say it's not correct, I simply mean that I would ideally get a more level starting position than I'm seeing by selecting that input color space. So let's instead go to our menu of red options here. Here is the next one that I will typically select when that doesn't work. I'm going to look through my options here. I want to look for Dragon Color 2 red log film. That's generally the most common form of color space, the most common color space and tone curve that red footage came in before the IPP2 system came out. So if I select this, let's just watch the image as I do and see how it comes out. That feels better. That may not be perfect either, and it may just be a matter that I need to grade this image from here, but that feels like a more level starting position. So I'm not going to say it's a full-on guessing game. It's a matter of having a list of usual suspects and clicking through them and finding the best fit. So it's not a perfect solution when you simply don't know the input color space, but that's some of how I go through that kind of detective process of figuring out what is the likely color space of this unidentified log material that I know is red. Okay, let's go forward and let's take a look at shot number 5. Now, I know some of you guys who've watched some of our other videos have brought up the fact that, like, wow, you seem to always be grading really pretty looking shots with no problems in them. You're kind of giving yourself softball pitches all the time. I don't want to be guilty of that today. I want to show you what I see as one of the worst expressions of a challenge that I see with red material. Now, I don't mean to dog on the photographer of this image. I think the image itself is fine, but we got some problems, don't we? We've got some really, really like nuked, very bright, very colorful things on these Christmas bulbs, don't we? And we got to do something about this. Now, you'll encounter this problem at various levels of severity when you're working with red footage, and it's kind of unique to red footage. You won't generally see it as prominently in other cameras, but you will encounter it with red footage, and there's a bunch of different stuff that you can throw at the problem. You could do a saturation knob, you could do a sat versus sat curve like we were just looking at, you could do a lume versus sat curve like we were just looking at, but I can tell you from experience, having played with this shot for a while, in this case where it's really, really burned and egregious, none of those things are going to work very well. So let me show you the way that I deal with this situation when it comes up and it's a pretty extreme amount of kind of clipping or chroma blowout that we're seeing here. I'm going to go to my gallery and I'm going to grab this gamut compressed node that I've saved and place it right at the head of my node graph right here. And what this tool is an adaptation that I built to get me the same style of gamut compression that was introduced in the ACES 1.3 system. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, that's okay. But if you do, then you have a little bit of context for what this is. Basically, what this tool is a method for compressing out of gamut colors. And you can see in the case of this image, these colors are so thoroughly burned into the negative that I'm still not fully solving the problem, and I probably never will. There's probably nothing that's going to recover these clipped colors completely because they are clipped so firmly in the sensor, but this is the best available solution that I've been able to find, is to use this gamut compress tool that I have here. And if you look in the link, or rather in the description for today's video, I'm going to leave a link to all the freebies that I offer here on the channel, and we're going to be releasing this exact tool very, very soon that is essentially going to allow you to use a really nifty feature of ACES in Resolve Color Management, which is what we are working in today. And it's especially useful for red footage where things are coming in with these sort of like clipped out color elements and allowing you to bring those things in right at the head of your node graph and in short order. Okay, so that is how I deal with these problems when they arise. And then from there, I'm right back to my normal playbook. Okay, so there are edge cases that come up, but other than addressing those edge cases as they do come up, I'm going back right into my normal playbook, working my exposure, working my contrast ratio. I'm going to go over and work my balance in just a minute, and working my way through the grade using those same tools that I always use when I'm color grading. Okay, so really from here, we're back into the realm of images that I'm going to grade the same way regardless of what they originated on. And again, I just want to emphasize as we wrap up today, by the time I'm grading this shot or this shot or this shot, I'm really not aware of the camera. In fact, depending on whether I prepped the project for myself or whether I had an assistant prep the project for myself, I actually may not know what camera it was shot on. And it really doesn't matter to me because it's been properly color managed. I've been teed up to work in my normal way. And I can now simply evaluate the image, respond to the image, collaborate with my client to find out what they want and find a great path to get there. And I'm really not thinking about the camera, I'm thinking about the image. So whether you are grading red material or material from any other camera, I just want to emphasize to you that the more you can move into an image-centric rather than a camera-centric workflow and mindset, the more success you're going to find, the better results you're going to get in your color grade. So thanks for hanging out with me today as we work through some red footage. If you enjoyed this, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you turn on your notifications. We do lots of content like this all the time here on the channel, and we always have a blast. Hope to see you in a live session really soon. If you want to talk more about this, we're going to have a full hour dedicated Q&A where we're going to talk about this subject and the other things that we talk about here on the channel. And if not, then we'll see you here in the channel for the next pre-recorded video that we do every single week. See you soon.